Crytek's Crysis has an impressive and lasting legacy, assuming you take the good with the bad. It's both revered and disliked in equal measure, though even those that dislike it as a game would still agree it was an impressive technical achievement that redefined targets for visual quality. My first experience with Crysis played out as well as you would expect for a console gamer who had invested in a middling desktop PC for university and work. For what it's worth, I could run Crysis, just at dismal and wildly variable frame rates on the lowest settings. As a result, I quickly gave up. It was only the simultaneous release of Crysis 2 on PC and the 6th-gen consoles in 2011 that reignited my interest. Going into the sequel with few expectations, I enjoyed it, and 7 months later, immediately picked up the first Crysis console remaster, giving me my first complete, if compromised, playthrough of the much-vaunted original, 4 years late. Based on my distant memory, the experience was fine, but as with the launch of Crysis 2, I mostly recall complaints from PC purists about changes to the scale of the environments, the visuals, and the streamlined gameplay elements. After finally picking up the remastered Crysis Trilogy earlier this year, I dutifully replayed the original on Xbox Series hardware, as it now, supposedly, exceeded the visual splendour of the PC original, allowed you to toggle between manual and automatic power activation, offered a 60 frames per second mode on all consoles, and had the missing Ascension level patched in. I figured this time, surely, I'd be able to give Crysis a fair assessment. Now, the one element that always surprises me about the Crysis games is how seriously they take their story, despite the central premise of stoic men in power armor, most of you more cliched masculine archetypes, taking on tentacled alien invaders to save humanity. To its credit, the original Crysis starts off slow and builds up tension. It hints at an alien threat early on, but you'll spend about 70% of your total playtime fighting North Korean soldiers and completing rather mundane military objectives. You infiltrate enemy camps, steal deployment data, rescue hostages, destroy air defenses to make way for a ground invasion, and later fight alongside Marines and other Special Force operatives. There are frequent story beats that provide you all the context you need for each gameplay scenario, but the bulk of it is very bland. You follow orders from military leaders that have personalities pulled from popular films, with the bulk of mid-mission dialogue consisting of familiar pseudo-military chatter. Then you hit the halfway point of the story, really the final third if you go by playtime, and things get distinctly weirder. You find yourself floating through an ancient alien starship emerging from slumber, running from an expanding, flash-freezing energy bubble, listening to vaguely scientific explanations about the nature of the threat, and then hit a cliffhanger ending that has the most important character in the series flying off back to an island, a significant gap in the trilogy if you don't read the follow-up comic. It's a jarring change of pace. The writing quality deteriorates from bland military fiction to rubbish sci-fi, and the entire finale feels rushed and underdeveloped. Even if you don't like the gameplay changes, the sequels at least offer better written, better paced, and more cohesive narratives. Although the 2020 remastered version of Crysis still plays like a game developed circa 2007, there's a lot to like about the gameplay loop in the opening half, assuming you're someone who prefers sandbox freedoms over a string of flashy set pieces. Crysis funnels you in and out of vast open areas, sometimes kilometers across, with the narrow stretches used to direct your view to important locations and spam you with expository radio messages, whereas the open areas provide you multiple routes to reach key objectives, or tackle optional objectives on the way. These open sections, often with sweeping views down or across valleys as the sun rises or sets, are both a gameplay and visual highlight, as you ghost through forests in stealth mode, storm villages and outposts in armor mode, commandeer a boat to escape pursuing troops, team up with Marines and use a tank to punch through fortifications, or provide VTOL cover for friendly convoys. If you've got the patience, it's also one of those games that let you take the long route around the outskirts of each area, often spending ages swimming or crouch walking, to completely circumvent many encounters. It's a design you'll very rarely see today. For the bulk of your playtime, you'll be relying on just your exosuit powers to keep you alive, with the ability to cloak by far the most useful. You can ghost right past many enemies, thin out stragglers and move into an optimal position before starting a firefight, or just get out of trouble when things go south. The gunplay is never more than competent, but coupled with the armor mode, the run-and-gun approach can be fun enough. That said, on balance, Crysis plays more like a tactical experience as you don't have a massive health pool, even on easier difficulties, and taking fire rapidly depletes the suit energy needed to sustain your different modes. Unfortunately, Crysis has limited and often exploitable enemy AI. It relies on cheap ambushes to increase the difficulty, and it has a poorly balanced arsenal. There are set-piece moments where a rocket launcher or minigun is a must, but given most battles play out at medium to long range, and ammunition is limited for special weapons, you'll likely spend 80% of the game with the North Korean FY-71 assault rifle taking up one of only 2 primary weapon slots, probably customized with a silencer and a scope to cover all your bases. What surprised me most, especially in light of the criticism levelled at Crysis 2, was just how linear and scripted the final third of Crysis is. From the moment you set foot in the mine holdout of the senior North Korean commander, you're effectively on the rails for the next 3 hours or so it takes to reach the credits. You'll wander through narrow mine shafts, experience annoying zero-G combat inside an alien spaceship, run between heat sources in a frozen landscape, and take part in a desperate evacuation using both ground vehicles and a VTOL, a dark and staggeringly boring level that could have stayed cut. All the sandbox elements are ditched, and you're always pushed forward. It makes narrative sense, but stripped of the sandbox options, it only serves to highlight the average gunplay and the wonky AI behavior when involved in mass combat. The ending sequence on an aircraft carrier is by far the worst offender. You walk through winding corridors and listen to pseudoscience babble and military jargon for 10 minutes, then run through a burning ship gunning down Ceph in tight corridors, backtrack to fetch a powerful weapon that could have been useful earlier, and then fight back to the flight deck to fire it at a suitably huge alien ship that serves as the final boss. In stark contrast to the opening hours, it's an incredibly linear and claustrophobic finale that doesn't even offer any impressive vistas. So the conclusion of any retrospective is usually whether an older game is still worth playing. In the case of Crysis, seemingly destined to be remastered and re-released as often as Skyrim, I'll fence it and say it depends. Chatting with friends and colleagues, there's an obvious split between former PC players and console players. If you grew up playing PC sandbox shooters, think Delta Force, the first Far Cry, or maybe the Halo port, but then skipped Crysis, well, Crysis Remastered could provide a decent nostalgia hit, at least for 2/3 of the game. Just be aware that those that praise it and criticize the dumbed-down for console sequels clearly choose to forget the final hours, with its sudden shift in narrative tone and restrictive on-the-rails gameplay. If, on the other hand, you've always been a console gamer and grew up playing Call of Duty or Medal of Honor instead, Crysis Remastered is a decently priced curiosity that'll give you a taste of classic sandbox shooting and an appreciation of where the "Can It Run Crysis" meme came from. However, that sandbox nature means it often feels less focused, poorly paced, and scrappier than your linear and scripted console shooters. Sometimes that freedom provides a satisfying and liberating sensation as you cloak past fortified outposts to hit a camp from the rear, whereas other times you'll get your tank stuck on some rocks or realize a cloaked enemy you have to kill to progress the story has beelined to the far end of the level after the AI bugged out. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow.